My name's Dan Hamill. I'm the co-chair of the Behavioral Health Committee for the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, along with Mike Parker. We have a joint.
Dan, your audio just turned off. Just
Weird. Okay, sorry about that. Not quite sure what's going on. Jill, if you can put the agenda back up, I can't see it. Okay, great. See a little bit more of it. There we go. Okay, and so this is the joint meeting of the Legal and Justice Systems and the Behavioral Health Committee, and we do this several times per year where we're sharing information across our committees. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here in the traditional and unceded territory of Lummi, Nooksack, Salish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared and tended for this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across the barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Thanks everyone for joining here this morning. We're going to go ahead and switch the order of the agenda to have a presentation by our regarding the mental health court, and that presenter is Robin Willens. And Robin, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen, but first I wanted to introduce myself. My name's Robin. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I came to the mental health court program in May of 2022 and returned back to Bellingham after being gone. This is my community of choice where my husband and I relocated back to for our third time. And over the past several months or maybe year and a half, I've been attending the meetings of both these committees in the background to get an understanding of, currently what's going on in our community, understanding of the work that's being done. So I thank you guys all for your work. It's been exciting for me to return back to Whatcom County and see everything that changed since I left 10 years previous to that. So, share my screen. Did that. Okay. So what I'm hoping to do today is to give everybody an overview of mental health court. I know some of you guys are familiar with mental health court from years past and what's been going on in the last several years. The brief history, how it works, and then some of our initial data. I'm hoping to have more updates. But just an overview because, health and community services in Whatcom County, we've been reorganized, and mental health court with how we've reorganized, this is where mental health court falls in the response division. The mental health court program, I'm working pretty closely with our other response division programs, and Perry Mowry supervises myself and our program. So a little bit about our structure. One of the things that I've been super excited about is looking at mental health court and the needs of our members from this population health framework, and looking at, what are the factors that we're seeing people with severe mental illnesses winding up in our justice system. And it's very closely tied to all of these factors and disparities, and looking at some of that comorbidity and really looking at it from the perspective of social determinants of health. When you look at what's traditionally been referred to as like criminogenic risk factors, they fall hand in hand with the social determinants of health and access to services, and especially when you look at the population of people that are struggling with severe mental illnesses. So I just wanted to lay that framework with the program. Is the framework that we're laying what we're doing within mental health court on top of and in the response division. So this is a little bit of an overview. I know this slide's really busy, packed everything in one, and I'll send this out. But really, we're looking at a therapeutic court. So if you ever come to mental health court, it looks very different than your traditional court, where we're looking at alternatives and wraparound services as alternatives to jail, really with our goal of preventing, getting people connected to the services and treatment they need, and preventing further justice system involvement. This program has been in place since 2015. Linda Grant was the program manager before she retired. And we actually have two courts. We have Wellness Calendar, which is in Bellingham Municipal Court, and then District Mental Health Court. Little back, primarily funded by the behavioral health tax. The way that we are structured is myself and a behavioral health specialist kind of coordinate a lot of the moving parts, do a lot of the screening, but we work with our community partners and subcontract for case management services, mental health services, once somebody enrolled in mental health court. And I'll talk a little bit more about that process in future slides. But when we're looking at eligibility criteria, we're really looking at legally competent adults 18 and over that reside in Whatcom County, diagnosis of a serious mental illness. Sometimes when they come to us and they're referred, sometimes our members don't have a well-established diagnosis. So that's part of our screening process too. We're looking at, without an intervention, that there's a high likelihood that we'll see them again in the legal system. So really trying to look at what it's going to take. When people are referred to me, they're in the community, they're in custody, and all of those referrals come through a defense attorney. But this brief eligibility criteria, and there really does, when we look at the charges, that there's a nexus between the charges and symptoms of mental illness. So our two different courts, these are our teams, our mental health court teams. In district court, we meet weekly, and in Bellingham Municipal Wellness Calendar, we meet bi-weekly. And close partnerships with the North County Public Defense and Whatcom County Public Defense Prosecutor's Office. Both courts, part of the team is District Court Probation, Behavioral Health Unit. And this is where we're at currently with our membership between the two therapeutic courts. In District Court, 19, you're going to see we're kind of busting at the seams. 19 actively enrolled, 2 scheduled to admit this week. Super excited about that. 14 pending referrals. So it's been really wonderful to see things get moving and rolling again. And at the same time, it's been a lot of work. And so then Wellness Calendar, our census is a little smaller. We meet every other week. We have 6 actively enrolled and 3 pending referrals. And then you can see who we partner with for our services. And then our process, if you're curious about like kind of how somebody becomes a mental health court member, it first starts with the defense attorney meeting with their client and figuring out if this is a good legal option for them. And the prosecution, the way the statute is written is a prosecutor has to agree. And then they confirm that they're legally eligible. In district court, once there's sort of an agreement in principle, that screening is forwarded to me. In municipal court, they do an order for screening. And the defense attorney submits the screening application to myself, where I look at really what the person's needs are, what their history of treatment has been, what additional information do we need. Sometimes we'll need a substance use disorder screening to see what services that person needs, looking at connecting somebody to mental health services. Some people will already be connected. And depending on where they are, if they're in the community or if they're currently in the jail, looking at, what it's going to take to get people into care. Put together this individual care plan. I can't tell you what it looks like for one person because it looks different for everybody based off of their needs. And there's really multiple mechanisms, multiple legal ways that somebody, could have a agreement for mental health court. In district court, most of our members start with charges that start as felonies and they end up being a drop-down plea. We can do both pre and post conviction. However, since I've been in this position, I haven't seen anybody come through pre-conviction yet. It doesn't mean we can't do it. I think that there's been some system challenges with doing it that way. Person agrees, and then basically seen in court. It's an 18 to 24 month program. And the really wonderful thing is at the end, we've got a wonderful graduation where the charges are dismissed, and recent change in district court that we're dismissing charges for everybody. Historically, that hasn't happened. So what goes on in mental health court? I would encourage and invite anybody that wants to observe, reach out to me and I can get you the details. It really is quite wonderful. Both Commissioner Henry and Judge Anderson are pretty talented with engaging with people in court at the weekly check-ins. Before that, though, we have a staffing where our whole team meets and we discuss the progress and the services the person is receiving. Before that, as part of their plan, there's a lot of work in the community of what does this person need? Are we working on housing? Are we working on mental health, substance use treatment? And then mental health court, we follow a program. We have a curriculum through that's EIMR, illness management and recovery model. And somebody progresses through 5 phases. So it's really looking at developing and supporting those skills where somebody can engage in care and have the skill to have wellness in their life and engage in services and make some of those improvements, access to housing. What does recovery really look like? And it's this supported environment for sometimes we feel like, we're just wrapping ourselves around somebody. So it's a supportive environment. So when they graduate, things will continue, but it won't be as intense. We do use a system of, there's a lot of rewards in mental health court just for showing up. Oftentimes, we need to welcome somebody, and oftentimes people don't have somebody saying, hey, I'm really glad you're here today. And checking in and saying, how you doing? Giving support through the successes and the challenges. We know that struggles and relapse are part of a process of recovery. But the people that we've been working with haven't always received that type of compassion, especially if you look at our legal system. That's why I think court looks really different. And I am very thankful for our compassionate judicial officers, our probation, our attorneys. It is a different way of interacting. So we have our rewards, our incentives, and then our therapeutic responses. And so, if somebody is having some struggles and positive UAs, the first response is what is going to be therapeutic. We have a bunch of different tools that we use. Treatment, number one. Sometimes we ask people, like, do you want a TAD device or a Scram, which monitors if somebody's using alcohol or not? Sometimes we will say we need this to help support you. And oftentimes people will choose some of those supports and come in and choose and say, hey, we know that you're struggling. What will be supported and how can we support you? Since I've started, we've used jail alternatives, work crew, sometimes to structure people's times, volunteer service and hours. And, you got rewards, therapeutic response, and And then at some point, there are sanctions that are asked for as a very, very last resort. Since I've started, I've seen jail time used once. There's a lot of research says that using jail in a therapeutic court is counterproductive, and we definitely saw that. So we're really looking at what's the newest evidence and how to best support people and what are our tools. And so talking about our successes and challenges, I'll give you a little overview of our numbers. Wellness calendar, Bellingham Municipal Court. Since the program started in 2015, we have served 40 unique individuals. And there's a breakdown of diagnoses. And of those 40 unique individuals, we've had 24 successfully graduate, 6 people who did not complete the program. And what our evidence has shown, even about that group that didn't complete the program, for both of our groups, is rearrest, if we're looking at recidivism, is lower for that group. So even a small dose of the intervention, if they don't graduate, is still a dose of this intervention that impacts future justice involvement. I was actually surprised our wellness calendar was split 50-50 male, female. This is our district mental health court clients. 71 unique individuals served since the beginning of the program in 2015. A little different numbers with successfully completed. That's the next step data that I was hoping to accurately represent was that recidivism data. But when I looked at the raw data and when it was collected, I didn't have enough time to give you the exact numbers, and I will get those to everybody of that group of successfully completed, and then how that correlates to reduction in charges. The most notably of what all of this equates to, though, is in the connection to services and to connection to treatment, whether it's SUD treatment, mental health treatment. So that's briefly by the numbers. And so our service connections, this number looks a little different because it's only since I started for clients, 67 unique clients, whether or not they started mental health court in 2021, new service connections. And part of the reason why I like this slide is we hear a lot about how we have challenges with people getting connected to services. We don't have services available. And it's true, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of barriers. We don't have enough providers. And for me, it was hopeful putting this all together, saying, yeah, the last 18 to 20 months, it's been really hard and it feels like we're in a desert, but we actually did connect. We made 133 new service connections in these categories. 85 of these new connections, they were different services, but those were for people re-entering and leaving custody. And since I started at 70 new mental health court referrals. And so things are moving. People are getting connected to care. It's not at the rate I would love to see it, and we have some challenges. But for me, this was very hopeful. And this 84% of the people referred to me, whether or not they entered mental health court, once we get the referral, myself and the behavioral health specialist that works with me, Tessa Worthen, we start looking at some of those reentry services, whether if they're in custody and then if they're in the community, connecting people to those services to be successful. So 84% of our referrals of people in custody resulted in a release to treatment. We currently have 6 new referrals that have come in the last couple of weeks that are awaiting some assessment. But this is the other piece that was really curious to me since starting, is if you look at how we're set up to serve misdemeanors because we're in district court in Bellingham Municipal. But in our district court, 89% in the last 4 years of those referrals started as felony charges that were dropped down to be in or held opened in a stipulated order of continuance. So our district court, we're primarily working with people who are charged with felonies. So our successes, growing referrals and enrollments. I think this return to in-person court, in-person supports, as people, as agencies start getting staffed up, we are seeing a return of people getting into services. With our own mental health court program, this fall, I was able to add a behavioral health specialist. Last year, I had an intern who then we were able to hire temporarily. So a little bit more support too, to serve more people. The contracts for 2023, we were able to expand to double our caseload capacity, our enrollment capacity. And those contracts, we added in custody assessments for a social determinant of health screening, and then connection to services, mental health assessment, and SUD assessment. Right now, it's a little challenging with some of the contracts that include the mental health assessment in the jail. They don't have providers to do them. And at the same time, we've got plans. So the other thing that we did in district court due to our growth is we were able to split the docket to expand capacity. Judge Anderson is really open to being creative. And so our first hour, we are able to see people that have primarily co-occurring mental health and SUD. And then the second hour is we do, believe it or not, have some people that are only diagnosed with a mental health disorder, or that, I mean, it actually, because it's so hand in hand, sometimes that it can be unique. And then that second group is also where people are a little further along in their recovery. So those are some pretty exciting, I think, exciting successes. Some of our challenges, one of the measures of the success of that determines the success of a therapeutic court is from the time somebody's arrested to the time that they can be connected to services. I don't think it's a surprise if we can reduce that time, and that time to entering into like a therapeutic court or entering into treatment, we can reduce that time, much greater challenge or much greater likelihood of success for that person. Right now, it's taking much longer than I would like, and sort of success standards, that length of time from arrest to referral to screening to entry. That process, I mean, the quickest I've seen it go has been about 6 weeks. The longest has been over a year. And we're really typically in the 3 to 6 month range. So that's one of the largest challenges that we have. Accessibility of SUD and mental health treatment assessment and treatment in and out of custody. Again, this is one that is getting better, but it is one of our barriers. Right now, we have very overloaded reentry services. So oftentimes, it is part of what we're doing when we have a referral, but we partner pretty closely. Sort of teamwork to hold up everything is the name of this game and the program. Again, our limited case management and mental health services, because we've been able to have 2 staff people in this program, we've been able to fill some of those gaps in case management. Shelter, emergency shelter, sober supported independent housing. With the exception of one of my in custody referrals, were being released to an emergency shelter or didn't have shelter to be released to. One of the challenges, I think, I do think that this is a program we could expand and adjust for small cities. Bellingham Municipal Court, our census is low. And so looking at what can we do to build Our high census in district court, opposite problem, we're hitting our capacity. And so what do we need to do there to adjust? And how are we going to make some of those decisions? One of the larger impacts for the program is when somebody's in custody, being able to connect somebody into services as they're leaving, so it's seamless, is a huge barrier because the Medicaid, gets, as many of you know, gets turned off. And then also when somebody's in custody, it's really difficult to do a screening for the housing pool. In future considerations, I'm seeing a lot of recent referrals of young people, that 18 to 25 age range, or emerging mental illness. It's an interesting trend, looking at if we need to do something there, or a therapeutic court for that population. Because we have so many felony drop downs, maybe there's a relationship with Superior Court to be explored. The LEAD program, there's also a close collaboration. Myself and the supervisor there, Tommy, we're often talking about that collaboration. Mental health sentencing alternatives. The criteria for mental health sentencing alternatives is parallel to the criteria for mental health court. So oftentimes I'm doing screening, and they also may be appropriate for mental health sentencing alternatives. That supervision looks different. The outcome looks different because it's the felony stays on somebody's record. And then, City of Bellingham, as they develop a community court, there's opportunities for collaboration. So, I've spit out a whole bunch of information. Anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee.
Yeah, I guess I would call him a hands up, Mike.
Sorry, my mute just went off. Robin, I can go ahead and just facilitate. Mike Parker and then Brian.
Great. Thank
Yep.
you.
Robin, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for taking over for the retiring Linda Grant. We always appreciated hearing from her. In your future considerations slide, I think that's food for thought about, maybe pathways to expand or to change. And one of the things that Linda, whenever she addressed this group, she would kind of hone in on certain ones. And one of the things that Linda honed in on this, that almost everybody she worked with was homeless. And it was very difficult, she thought, and feedback from her case managers was working with individuals while homeless was just that much harder to make real meaningful progress. Could you comment on that? And do you have any ideas or wish lists when you type in future considerations? What does that look like to you? Or what have you researched and heard about that screams to you as a good option?
Yeah, my goodness. Being able to have access to sober supported housing or shelter as somebody is exiting the jail or entering our program, as soon as somebody has some of that stability, it makes a world of difference. We've been closely partnering with Sun House when somebody is able to meet their criteria. We've been working with Lake Whatcom Center's Heart Recovery Emergency Shelter. And that has made a world of difference. If we had more of those types of opportunities, now that's emergency shelter, and then it makes a world of difference. And that emergency shelter, what we don't have is what's that next step? City Gate, there's some dedicated units there. I would love to have more of City Gate. I would love to have more of that for people as they're entering recovery and supporting recovery and some of the long-term change. There are a lot of best practices about having some housing for people to transition into. King County's model definitely has you enter, they have some places for people to go. Similar barriers as everywhere though right now, is there's overloaded systems that can't meet the need. But yeah, it's definitely supported housing and some ability to transition. Believe it or not, the housing pool is really helpful. And because somebody's in the jail and they're in the jail for over 90 days, they're not always eligible for that housing pool. So it's you know, we have a lot of things that we maneuver and like I like to say we kind of dance with, but it makes it hard, and everybody has high need, and I know we have to prioritize, but for my program specifically, not having access to some of that and the impact of people in the jail, not being eligible for certain resources, it makes it challenging.
Robin, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that before I call on Brian. You had a two-part question. One, you had mentioned the Lake Whatcom Heart Center. Can you just describe how many beds is that, and what's the duration? How long can people stay there?
You know, I actually don't know off the top of my head number of beds. I have a coworker telling me 8, and duration is up to 90 days. I think that we have somebody that can answer that question exactly on this. I think Mike can answer that. Mike, are you able?
I am, yes. So the recovery beds they're 8 beds. There's no real time limit that a client, has to be discharged by. The thing is case management. They're kind of followed by their outside case management. The recovery beds are for individuals who are transitioning from institutions, mental health facilities, substance use treatment facilities, mental health ENTs, and even jails. So it's just to kind of support that step down stage, hoping to increase the beds there. But yeah, there's no real, and it's a harm reduction recovery model. So.
Okay. Part 2 of the question is, there are some additional resources coming online that will be available in the future. I'm thinking of Samish Commons, and I think there's 13 homeless upon entry units that are associated with that facility. And I don't know, I thought I saw Brian Fain on the call. I'm wondering if he could chime in on that, if he's still here. Maybe he's not.
I'm still here, Dan. And I'm sorry, could you state your question again, please?
Sure. I guess what I'm trying to speak to Robin's concern regarding, what happens after perhaps a short-term stay at an emergency shelter. What's the next step that folks what opportunities are there for the next step for the longer term housing? And would the homeless upon entry units at, for example, Samish Commons, perhaps be available, or some of them available for Robin's clients?
Yes, potentially. And I believe at the first phase of Samish Commons, which is 69 units, 20% of those are set aside for folks exiting homelessness. I'm trying to recall, I think that may be, I can't recall off the top of my head. I'd have to double check whether the 52 units of senior housing age 55 and older has homeless set aside.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Brian, for chiming in. And I'm going to go ahead and recognize Brian and then Chief Tanksley. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you for your presentation on the mental health court. I guess my question is, we've had 71 people that have successfully completed the program since 2015, if I heard you correctly, which is a good number, but I'm just wondering about the potential to serve more people in the community with both mental health and drug court. So in general, what are the barriers to scaling up both those courts, and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, so and actually we've had 71 in district mental health court and 40 in municipal. And so the number is higher, but really the number one constraint right now is in district court is time on the docket. We are maximizing how much time Judge Anderson can just see in the 2 hours that she has to work through everybody. Bellingham Municipal Court, I really think we need to take a deep dive on like what we can do to expand that capacity. I've got a lot of different ideas and talking with community partners and Judge Love and Commissioner Henry and North County Public Defense to the LEAD program. There's some real natural partnerships that we can look at, and then once that gets full, then we're looking at docket time. Some of the other barriers is quite honestly service providers. We have service providers that are maxed out, and so right now a lot of my pending referrals, I have people that I can't connect to services right now. And I think it's coming. I think we're going to be, I don't know if you have, I'm very optimistic. I'm like, there's a way we can do this. But it does feel like we're sewing a lot of things together. And so those are some of our barriers. District Court Probation Behavioral Health Unit, they've been very clear that like, as we get numbers, they can work with us and open communication with basically being able to follow those individuals. The other piece too, it does take more attorney time too. The individuals that we work with in mental health court are pretty complex. And so those are some of our barriers as we expand. The largest one right now is just time on a docket. So.
Is there anything this group can help to raise awareness or facilitate some of those changes you mentioned, potential changes?
I'd have to think about that. I'm sure there are, and some of it is with awareness of referrals and our capacity in our Bellingham Municipal Court. In looking at if this is an intervention that would be, I've been really curious since I started about like what it would look like for the small cities, and is this an intervention that we can adjust and adapt for some of the small cities? We've kind of had this large influx, so it's one of those things that's like next on my agenda to like, is there interest? What could we do? What is the need? Understanding what the need is, and I do think this group definitely gets a lot of information about what the need is and the needs throughout our county.
My only observation would be if you could quantify some of the things you talked about in terms of people waiting because there's no providers. I mean, just starting to put some of this down on paper, that might be helpful. And I would, Mike and Dan, I think the group should revisit this this year and see what we can do.
Yeah, because specifically, we are about to hit our maximum in district court, and I've got 16 people waiting to enter, and I know we don't have enough space on the docket unless we're being really creative, because we want to do it well too. So figuring out if there are some additional partnerships, it'd be helpful.
Brian, I'm going to speak to your point here in just a minute. I want to get through the queue. We've got some folks that are patiently waiting to speak. I want to recognize Chief Tanksley, then Executive Satpal Sidhu, and then Jason Smith. Go ahead, Tank.
Well, Robin, thanks for that great presentation. Actually, you answered some of my questions, but back to the referrals. Can you briefly talk about the referral process?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the referral process, the way the statute's written for the therapeutic courts is prosecutor has to agree for a referral to move forward. And so I get people reaching out to me all different stages about mental health court and if they'll be eligible. I refer that person back to their defense attorney. Right now, the referral process is basically defense attorneys that are either family members or clients who are saying, hey, mental health court is something I would like. I refer them to their defense attorney. They look at if it's part of the legal strategy that they would like. I also get referrals from multiple places saying, hey, have you considered so-and-so? And so it's usually me going, okay, well, who's their defense attorney, and sending them a message saying, hey, this was suggested to me as maybe something that could be helpful to this person. So that's that referral process. The defense attorneys provide me with some background information, so I have enough to start. I'll back up. Once they're considered legally eligible, and there's an agreement in principle between the defense and the prosecution for mental health court, then that application comes to me, and I look at a lot of the clinical criteria and see if they meet the clinical criteria, then propose a plan and move that forward to our mental health court team. And once we have that plan, they're entered into mental health court and they start. Did that answer your question enough?
It did, but as I can imagine that each case is different. So do you have a average time maybe that a person waits in the referral process? So I guess what I'm getting at, I'm trying to figure out how long are some people waiting, trying to get into the program? Thank you.
Yeah, if somebody has mental health providers, if somebody's not in custody and they have mental health providers all set up, the average time is probably 4 to 6 weeks. If somebody is in custody, doesn't have any service providers, needs to be connected with treatment, that average time, the last time I did an average was sitting around 5 months. Now, in that 5 months, it doesn't mean that there's no services and nothing going on. In that 5 months, we're doing an SUD assessment. Oftentimes people are starting with residential SUD treatment and being like a TR to treatment before they enter mental health court, or we're connecting them with case management services. That's the average. And then there's some real big outliers there too that have taken much longer.
Executive Sadhu.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some information with everybody that we are fully engaged with Alicia and Sharon Shoemake. There's opportunity for getting about $9.5 million. I don't know how much it would be, but we are offering the county will match the funding. This is for a 32-bed facility. Is called behavioral health urgent care. Now, this is very hot topic in the legislature right now, and they are going to do money. When these things come up, we don't have the choice but that we need a facility of this kind. I know that this is going to be a less than 24-hour facility, which may not be the best choice we have right now, but I think that I don't want to miss that opportunity, because if we get this money, then we can find other monies to do that. But we are very hopeful. We just sent a proposal to the Alicia and Shoemake. And, it's going to take us time. Bits and pieces may not look more systemic that, okay, this should happen first, then it should happen. So, but we are ready for anything what we can do. I just wanted to share this information with everybody. Thank you.
Executive Sadhu, will there be an involuntary commitment component to that facility from your perspective?
It's not clear yet, but I think that this is something we as Soul Society have to decide on that, because it's very much needed. The amount of money, effort we all spend, and then it gets stuck at such kind of things becomes so frustrating for all the people in that field and people who can know that they can really, really help. I don't know yet, but we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Satpal, is that SB 5120?
Satpal, you just muted yourself. Satpal. You just muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that I'm not into the weeds. I don't really track these numbers and things. I'm just into wherever I can sign and have conversation with our legislators. I do that. They are more on top of it, but I can find and send you the information.
I just was gonna, I had talked to Jed Holmes earlier, and I think it is SB 5120.
Okay.
People
Okay.
in the bill.
Probably that's what it is. Thank you.
Jason Smith, you had your hand up earlier. Did you still have a question or a comment? Maybe he had to leave. Okay, committee members, other questions, comments for Robin? I just wanted to add this in real quick here, since we are talking about talking about therapeutic courts. Yesterday, City Council spent a considerable amount of time talking with our police chief, Judge Lev from Municipal Court, Prosecutor Ryan Anderson, the mayor, and the city attorney regarding a proposal that the mayor had set forth. It was an ordinance that would make it illegal to use controlled substances in public. It would make it a misdemeanor. And there's also like the big part two of that was that that use could be tied to a therapeutic court in terms of having like an off ramp for folks who were using, in many cases, fentanyl is what we're seeing used in public, to some extent lesser methamphetamine, but it's more so the fentanyl. Ultimately, the council did not adopt the ordinance, and they may adopt it later. I don't know, and I can't speak for council. I think the concerns were having there were many concerns, but not having an actual therapeutic court ready to go to help people, and the length of time it takes to create a therapeutic court, engage all those service providers, and get the MOUs, and have the housing component, which was brought up here earlier. Those pieces are not in place. And so, Robin, I guess a question for you is, if you were to build a community court, is what was being proposed, how long is that? A 6-month process? Is that a year-long process, or is it a 18 months? Or do you have any sense at all?
You know, I don't have a good sense of how long it would take in its entirety. I am really excited about a community court, and I think our communities need community court. And so my brain's been going full speed ahead with ideas on how we can do community court for actually several months. And so I do think we have some scaffolding and infrastructure between both, mental health court and recovery court, our therapeutic courts that already exist. And I think part of the model that mental health court uses with some of our community contracts is some of that scaffolding that could be considered. So how long? It's really hard to say. I'm very optimistic. So I'm also a crisis worker by trade. So in my world, things move a lot faster than they actually do. Maybe there's pieces that could be done within like 6 months, and then there's other pieces that could be worked out over the next year. So it's a hard question for me to answer, because I think what would determine that is if you bring a lot of the community partners together, and they're the same community partners I'm working with, of what they have capacity. I think some could say they could do bits and pieces of it. And some are very overloaded and there just is no capacity. So
Okay.
It's a hard question to ask. I do think that there's some conversations that could be had that could give us a better gauge, and that there's some pieces that maybe we could start with and pilot.
Okay, that's fair. I think it would be a phased-in project myself as well. And then my other question, I don't see any other hands up, so I'm just going to ask my maybe second to last question. This community court would be the referrals would be people charged with misdemeanor use. And so I wanted to get your perspective, and perhaps I see Prosecutor Rucci is also on the call, just your professional opinions regarding the leverage of a misdemeanor versus a felony drop down. Whatcom County Jail is not taking misdemeanors. Hey, Arlene, I think you've got your mic on and we're just getting some static here. If you want to just mute yourself. Thanks. I just wonder to what extent in your opinion, that leverage of a misdemeanor with no jail time, not here anyway, perhaps in a contracted jail services. But my understanding is that even the one that we have right now with the SCORE facility, they won't take drug sick people. So there's really not an option for, that leverage piece. Do you think, Robin and or Eric, that that a misdemeanor would work to kind of hold somebody accountable, I guess is a way to put it?
I think some of it is tapping into what the motivation is to engage. A lot of the people that will engage, especially in Bellingham Municipal, the motivation is they want that wraparound support. And what do we actually have that we can offer for them to engage? And then, sort of like that benefits and rewards. Community courts, there's one in Spokane and one in Olympia that I would love to see how it runs, because they're able to rapidly offer people connection to services to engage in this process. And I think that would be key. And so it would be addressing sort of that immediate need, and there's that incentive to engage along with the legal incentive with the misdemeanor. I think people get overwhelmed with the 18 to 24 months commitment to our current mental health court program. For misdemeanors, sometimes it has to take a different type of a motivation.
Fair enough.
So if I can just answer your question, Dan, I think there are a lot of benefits to this idea, and it's not just leverage, it's contacts with people, and it's helping them not only get directed in the right place, but it's also just the contact is going to help protect our community. I can guarantee you that you would see some benefits out of such of a process. As it was described to me by the mayor, I think it just makes a lot of sense, and I encourage everyone to embrace this idea.
Thank you, Prosecutor Rich. I appreciate that, and I don't want to imply that that I'm only looking at this from a leverage perspective. That's not where I'm coming from. I just want to understand, given the fact that we have professionals here in the Zoom room, what those motivations are when it comes to, maybe it's housing or access to, or having a social contact or a case manager, things like that. I think it's just there's several pieces here, so I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And we normally talk about leverage to get people into treatment, but sometimes that won't be what we're really accomplishing here with this contact, but contacts will help protect our community.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And I see Raylene has her hand up.
Thank you, Dan. I just wanted to say thank you, Robin, for your presentation and the information. It's been outstanding this afternoon. In mental health court, I know there have been referrals from some of the other misdemeanor courts in the county, whereas prosecutors have advised the defendants and the judges that, hey, this individual is already in mental health court with district court or with the city of Bellingham, and we're willing to work with this defendant as long as they're successful in this program, that we would be willing to dismiss the charges in our court if they can succeed in this program. So I know there's a need and a want to expand these services throughout the county for all of the jurisdictions. There is funding through the state and national level for further mental health courts. I think some of the other challenges that you brought up are definitely things that we want to look into, is expanding housing and working on re-entry. I think those are definite issues. I think the other place that we might want to look at further is, you mentioned the 18 to 24-year-olds who are definitely a problem, and maybe focusing from the juvenile perspectives on that issue. I think some of the family issues that come with that are definitely a challenge before they reach the age of 18. But once again, I want to just thank you and put out that I think all of us are willing to try to step up. The other thing I'd like to see is if we can figure out how to not have defendants lose their insurance when they get booked into jail. Thank you.
Thanks, Raylene.
Oh, your father it is. Wants to reach you. He does.
I think that was Mike talking to his daughter. So it's 12:27. We still have Thomas Kinlan to present on phase 3 for the Trueblood decision. And yeah, Mike, we got a little snapshot into your
That's not me, Dan. My child's not here today, so that must be somebody else. Normally, I would take that if that was me, but that's not me.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, Thomas, sorry, we went over a little bit in our last presentation. Robin, thank you so much for your time today. But these are both really big topics. Thomas, I want to go ahead and give you the rest of the time here.
Well, thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. Tom Kinlan, I'm the director of the Office of Forensic Mental Health Services. I've met with you a couple times previously and just wanted to kind of give you an update of what's maybe going on with Trueblood and the Trueblood world, which is going to be your competency evaluations and competency restoration. And so thought I would just kind of jump in and talk about the phase 3 process. So as you all probably know, but I'll give a little bit of background. So the contempt settlement agreement was for inpatient services for competency. So whether it was evaluation or restoration, there was a contempt settlement agreement that looked at phase 1 and 2 regions. So phase 1 was your Southwest region, Pierce and Spokane. Phase 2 is King. And so last summer, we came together for negotiations related to phase 3. Phase 3, as outlined in the contempt settlement agreement, indicates could do a kind of combination of things. You might look at phase 1, phase 2 counties and see if there's enhancements to some of the programs that we offer to see if we can try to reduce the demand, or look at expansion or some type of combination thereof. And so one of the things that we explored was what's going on in phase 1 and 2. So in those areas, just as a quick reminder, or for the first time, services offered are things like outpatient competency restoration, forensic navigators that help with both diversion opportunities and folks enrolled in outpatient competency restoration, to looking at crisis stabilization services, co-responders, crisis intervention training, programs related to housing. Sounded like in your previous discussion, the importance of housing. So there's a program associated with that called FHARPS. And then another program called FPATH that focuses on outreach and engagement for those that tend to come through the competency system on a repeat basis, to see if there's ways to sever that connection and get them services that they need to stop that process. So kind of a variety of services that are being offered. And so during the summertime, and into the fall, we're meeting to see what we needed to do, and kind of landed on looking at some enhancements for phase 1 and 2, where it was really trying to add some additional staff to these outreach and engagement and housing programs, trying to get a prescriber and involved with the outpatient competency restoration program, a little more hands-on with that because of the importance of medications, and a prescriber tied to the housing and outreach and engagement team. So really the look back was just looking at how to maybe increase some staffing resources. And then expansion wise, because we were doing a look back, was a bit limited in sort of a recommendation. And so 2 regions were kind of put forward for the legislature to consider. The Thurston Mason region and the Salish region were put forward as a possible phase 3 expansion, with the idea, and I'll get into this in just a second, with then phase 4, 5, and 6, because the ultimate goal is to take these programs statewide being discussed next summer for phase 4, and then following time periods for 5 and 6 till we have these programs statewide. So that was going as well as negotiations between defendants and plaintiffs can go, but hit a large bump in the road, which is related to Western State Hospital and competency beds. Don't know if how people track numbers on this, but I will just share competency wait times and wait lists has pretty much skyrocketed since 2021. So 2021, you were probably July looking at a maybe 45 to 60-day wait for competency services and a wait list of about across the entire state for competency services less than 400 people. This morning, the wait list was at 812 people. And you're looking at wait times for Western State Hospital for competency services, probably 10 to 12 months to get into services now. One of the reasons why that occurred, and I think probably all of you or most of you know, we had civil conversion, felony civil conversion individuals that were being dismissed and referred to Western State Hospital for evaluations. And that population, because of long wait times, where people were being dismissed and were being admitted to the hospital, the easiest way I can describe it is from July 2021, you would have had, say, 170 competency beds and about 50 of these civil conversion beds. Today, it's flip-flopped. And so you have about 170 beds that are civil conversion and about 60 beds competency. And so you've created a situation where Western has no beds to admit. And so notice was given in December about Western State Hospital saying at times we might not be able to admit and would not admit a felony civil conversion. And that was sent out by the Assistant Secretary, Kevin Bovenkamp. So we've got this pressure of no beds really available for competency. I think some of you guys might have been talking about this in your previous session, where you just have, whether it's misdemeanors, whether it's felonies, people are waiting extraordinary long periods of time in jails across the entire state to get admitted. And so the plaintiffs in the lawsuit said, well, you guys are not using those beds for class members, and so we are going to file for breach of the settlement agreement. So they did those motions or filed those motions in the kind of late fall, early winter, so kind of the November, December timeframe. So what does that mean? Well, what they're saying is basically you need to limit competency services at the state hospital to violent felonies and sort of everybody else you wouldn't be admitting. So some pretty drastic measures, including you need to pay $200+ million in fines. As part of that process, and why I kind of am meeting with folks across the state talking about this, is we're not sure what this contempt settlement agreement would be looking like as we move forward. Because of the breach of the settlement agreement motion, if that's no longer in play, both DSHS, HCA, other entities need to examine what would they be doing moving forward, especially if fines are being paid, so on and so forth. So that process that was pretty well delineated, at least in the contempt settlement agreement, is a big unknown with court scheduled for the end of this month. where the judge is going to hear the case and then make a decision on basically how DSHS is handling admissions and processes related to class members and even this felony civil conversion population. What I wanted to add too is, as we look at the services that are offered in these kind of phased regions, so I'll just pick on one, outpatient competency restoration. And I know there's a current bill that's going through the legislative process right now, so we'll see where we land on that end, on competency services and so on. But these are kind of programs that we were invested in, believe in, sort of prior to even doing this contempt settlement agreement. The things that we would need to look at is, what would it look like if we don't have sort of this binding agreement, and how do we sort of move things forward after that? And so, for example, going back to OCRP, outpatient competency restoration, what does that look like, say, perhaps in the new law, depending on what the bill looks like when it's done, and how can we best sort of start getting resources out to other areas in the state? And I'll just be completely transparent. Don't know, don't have an answer to that today. A lot probably hinges on what happens in court at the end of this month, and what orders are going to be coming from Judge Peckman after that. And so there is just kind of a lot going on, a little bit of uncertainty on kind of how it falls with the contempt settlement agreement. You know, what's the legislature going to do as it faces some possible large fines and everything related to this court action? And since it had been a while, a long while since I had spoken to all of you, I did want to kind of touch base and share information and be available for questions, since I know a lot is going on. And obviously you guys see the wait lists and wait times, folks just sitting in your jails, not getting into the hospitals in a timely manner. So wanted to be available to share information and answer any questions that you might have. So that's really kind of what I wanted. So Dan, I can turn it back over to you, and if folks have questions, I will gladly answer those.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for the update. It's wow, that's a lot. Committee members, questions for Thomas? Mike Parker.
Ellen, thank you for being with us today. And I'm sure this is a challenging subject to have to go talk to groups such as ours, right? You're not bringing any good news to us today. You actually brought pretty bad news to us. So I'll just be real frank about that. Don't hold you personally accountable, but obviously our community is pretty incensed. This is a really difficult thing for everybody that's involved, that's on this call, whether that be in our criminal legal system, and certainly for the humans that are waiting, languishing in jail. But I'm really curious about, I've heard you speak before, and I really appreciated your candor. And I wonder if I might implore upon you with a little bit more candor. How do we get out of this? I mean, Trueblood happened a long time ago, and we have not gotten ourselves out of that. As a matter of fact, we've gotten worse, and there's always a reason. There's always something that happened, or there's something here or something there. But the long and short of it is, it doesn't appear to me and to some other members of my behavioral health committee that we're doing the right steps, that we even have a plan to get us out of that. And so I just wonder if you might comment on, I mean, we're aware of governor's plan and budget to build more mental health facilities. We're aware of Maple Lane and things like that. Can you speak to what you, just on your own gut, and whatever you're comfortable being candid with, about how do we get out of this situation where we have timely, humane behavioral health treatment services for those in our criminal legal system?
Yeah, great question. And so definitely look at it as a bit of kind of my own take. You're probably looking at two main areas that need to be addressed. One is capacity, and making sure that you have enough capacity. With that, though, is the caveat, and I think it just shows, even since 2015, you're not going to build your way out of this problem. Because we can say we bring on 200 beds tomorrow, and then all of a sudden we're 50 beds short. And so with that, yes, additional capacity. And I should share that Western State Hospital does have 58 beds coming online in the next 3 months. Those are competency, dedicated competency wards. So that is going to be helpful. There's also 16 beds opening up at the Maple Lane facility in the next month or so, which is going to take those Western State Hospital felony civil conversion individuals. So again, creating the space because the backfill behind those individuals would be competency. And then I'll just throw in case people aren't aware, there's also 30 beds that are going to be opening at Maple Lane for the not guilty by reason of insanity population. And basically we're going to transfer 30 of those individuals from Western down to Maple Lane, thereby creating another 30 beds for competency services. So hopefully by the end of the year, we're looking at 114 beds that we would be using for class members, which would be a start in the right direction. Obviously, there's the hospital at UW, and the new hospital at Western as well. That's going to provide additional beds. So I think the first one is capacity and making sure that we try to get capacity. Unfortunately, capacity a lot of times does take time to get it online. Very rarely are you going to find a turnkey building that folks can walk into. You're going to have to do some remodeling. You might have to build something. So that does take time. The other piece is continuing to look at what kind of policy changes do we need to do? You know, statutorily, do we need to make changes? Is the bill that is going through right now through the governor's office? I think there's things in there that are wonderful. So one big thing that I think is wonderful in those areas that I think is right now tied to the contempt settlement agreement because of the navigators is a more robust diversion plan for misdemeanors. Really trying to divert those from, say, the competency system out to diversion, and how we can expand that and do more related to that with a tie to assisted outpatient treatment. So I think there's things from, do we need to make some statutory changes, to what are things like what you guys do as a wonderful committee? What can we do at our local areas too? Are there things that we're seeing, like the whole mental health court, and you guys were having a robust discussion of, are there things that we can do differently? It sounded like Robin had a lot of ideas, and are some of those things translatable to reducing the overall population? And that's kind of the biggest thing, is trying to work with local entities to also see, why is everybody having an increase in competency referrals? So for example, Whatcom County, you guys have increased in referrals steadily from 2013 to now. And you're not the only county. It's like sort of everybody's on this upward trajectory of competency referrals. And is that tied to substance use? Is that tied to more individuals having behavioral health issues, especially after or during the pandemic? So Mike, it's a great question. So it's really kind of two prongs: capacity, and I think kind of policy changes, and what other good ideas. In fact, I was at the hearing this morning on that Senate Bill 5440, where Senator Dingra was saying, you know, I'm kind of imploring everybody for ideas. What are any and all ideas that we can put forward to not make a dent? We got to do more than that. We got to take out huge chunks and start getting to reverse course, because we're just on like this upward path on competency referrals across the entire state. So that's what I would say. So yeah, are there things that we could do both locally, statewide, as it relates to policy, and then capacity?
Thanks, Thomas. Just one quick clarifying question before I call on Mike Smith and Raylene King, who are in the queue. You had mentioned the facility at the UW. Is that a 100-bed facility, and is that operational, or is that still in development?
Still in development. It'll be a total of 150 beds. And I think how they were looking at it is probably 75 of those would be like your kind of LRA type beds for like your 9180-ish type individuals, because they're also got some kind of medical behavioral health type beds as well, as my understanding. What might be the other 75, but they're not operational at this time.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Mike Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Thomas, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Talking about funding and capacity, do you know of any current, I guess, plans for Western State to develop a discharge process for those individuals who've been there, who needs to be discharged, so they can make room for the individuals needing to go to Western State? Seems like it's kind of smashed from two ends. So I see how we're preparing for the entrance side with the capacity of restoration, competency flips, but just kind of wondering what that looks like when we stretch the lens out to the other end, what's being done on that side. That's the first question. Second question, I guess, is are the outpatient competency restoration programs being rolled out into phases with Trueblood, or do you have a sprinkle of them outside of the rollout of the phases?
Yeah, great question. Let me take the competency one first. Right now, for us and Healthcare Authority, that is tied to the phases and being rolled out. So we don't have any that are sprinkled out, though. If there are local communities that want to do one on their own, we're available for like resources, answer questions, almost like technical assistance. But we wouldn't be providing the navigators or the contract funding for a provider for counties that are outside or regions outside of the phases at this time. To go with discharge plan, yes, actually that is a huge focus for Western State Hospital specifically, but also Eastern State Hospital, on making discharge even more robust than what it has been. Now, I'm a little less involved in that, but I do know that they have been looking at improving databases, hiring staff, looking at what they can do to improve the discharge process from Western out into the community. So whether an individual is a felony civil conversion or just was admitted to the hospital as a civil patient, how we can get all of those individuals back out to the community as safely and expeditiously as possible. So I know that is a specific focus that they have right now at Western State Hospital. And if it's interested, I can probably connect you with the lead on that project if you wanted more details. And please just, I can put my email in the chat if you wanted to do that.
Sounds good, thank you. Please do.
Okay, Raylene King.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kinlan, for your presentation. It's very informative, a little bit depressing, but I know it's not your fault. I understand this is more of a triage that we have to deal with the people in custody and try to get the most violent offenders help first. So I get that we're not always able to assist the misdemeanants that are out of custody that can't be booked due to other restrictions. But I'm still looking for hope, and hope to give answers to victims of the crimes, to business owners, to community members that are frustrated because they can't go into businesses that are surrounded by individuals that have mental health issues, by officers that are frustrated because they're getting calls to respond to areas where they know there's nothing that they can do at this point. There's trespass complaints, there's people that need the help, and there's struggles all around. And then I was hoping Jason was going to be able to stay on. I think he had to jump off for a court hearing, but our last court hearing, we had a status hearing on an individual that's out of custody for domestic violence, no contact order violations, currently not held, has been in Western State before. And we were looking for a status update on when they were going to be able to have another competency evaluation. And he said a year to never. And we've been basically waiting for a year, and that's not the only one. There's more out there. And I guess I understand you're not going to be able to solve all those issues. I just was hoping that we would have maybe some more direction on what to tell members that call, the victims that call and say, hey, what's the status of my case? And right now, judges are looking at dismissing cases because their sentences wouldn't be as long as they're waiting to actually find out if they're competent to stand trial. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point, because we do prioritize those that are in jail instead of those, so in custody versus out of custody. And so you are correct for, say, a out of custody evaluation. This is across the entire state. You probably are waiting a year, where, say, in custody evaluation for competency, generally going to be 14 days or less. One of the things, and I'll just make this short because I can see we're running out of time, is we have asked, and it is in the governor's budget, so we'll see what happens with the House and the Senate, for additional evaluator staff to focus on that out of custody population. So we actually are asking to double that current group so that we can start trying to go from 12 months to 11 to 10 to 9 and just keep reducing that. So we do have a request to add more evaluation staff to address that specific concern of out of custody individuals waiting a year for an evaluation.
Thank you, Dr. Kinlan. And when we're asking for that, are we also making sure that they're aware of, we needed more staff before, and now with the increase of population that are in mental health needs, it's double what we would have asked for before. I mean, at least it seems that way. It seems like it's increasing statewide for both.
Yeah, just real quick. So we did ask for actually a total of, I think it's 16 additional forensic evaluators, with some of that group being dedicated specifically to out of custody, but then others working for reevaluations, hospital evaluations in jail as well. So we are trying, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that both the House and the Senate would fully fund that.
Thank you.
Perry Maury.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Hi, Dr. Kinlan. Thanks for the information. Certainly appreciate it. I wonder, or maybe you can direct me, I wonder if you know, been doing a bit of research relative to OCRPs that are established at this point in time, talked with Clark County, just got some information about what's it like, boots on the ground, providing services, what are the challenges, those kinds of things. So that was really helpful. I know that in Kevin Bovenkamp's letter, it indicates that there's 11 counties that have OCRP programs currently. I was searching, I don't know the term of it anymore, the index for that's put out for behavioral health agencies, certification, and was just struggling a little bit with finding where those other programs were. I did find Spokane, and obviously, Clark County. So just wasn't really clear how to find those other programs, how to get more information, of course, is what I'm after, just in terms of that experience. And I know that there is a prosecutorial diversion program. We've actually communicated with them in King County, the Legal Intervention and Network of Care program, the LINK program. So beyond that, I'm wondering if you know about or aware of other prosecutorial diversion programs that are up and running, and just any information about the OCRPs so that we can educate ourselves further.
Yes, and sorry, it doesn't look like I have chat capability, but I know I've communicated with Jill. So Jill, first of all, definitely you can share my email with this entire group and folks that have questions. But Perry, if you don't mind, I'll ask Jill for your email and I can communicate. The short answer is yes. I have information that I can provide you for other outpatient competency restoration programs and non-King prosecutorial diversion programs. So I can get you additional information.
Super. I'll take responsibility to send you an email.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to do any of that. So I'll do that as soon as the meeting's over. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Committee, further questions for Dr. Kinlan? Okay, seeing none, we are about at the end of our time, and we do need to accommodate for public comment here. Dr. Kinlan, thank you so much for the information. We, as always, appreciate it. We look forward to having you back again at some point later. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill Nixon, do we have anybody in our attendee list that wants to speak to the committee?
We have 3 attendees in our list. If any of you would like to speak to the committees, please virtually raise your hand now by selecting the raise hand icon. And no hands are raised, and I don't see anyone attending in person in our conference room.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're going to get a couple minutes of our day back here. Committee, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I think these meetings are so informative, and I just appreciate you all. And we will see you next time. And thank you, Legal and Justice folks, for this joint meeting. I think that these are highly valuable for both of us, in my opinion. And thank you, Arlene and Raylene, for your continued commitments. And we will see you next time. And this meeting is now adjourned.